There comes a time, somewhere after 50, when you realize home isn't just about where you live. It's about how you live. It's about who you're becoming and what you're ready to make space for. I'm Juli Ford, real estate expert and longtime wellness coach, and someone who's lived in a multi-generational home for the past decade while reinventing my life and my business. And this is Home After 50, a podcast about what it really means to find, shape, and come home to a new season, to a new home, to a new version of yourself. Whether you're thinking about upsizing, downsizing, moving in with family, or just asking bigger questions about what's next, you're in the right place. Each episode, I will share stories, insights, and real strategies for women redefining home and life on their own terms. Because after 50, home isn't just a place, it's a calling. And this time, it's yours. Today, I would love to talk with you about something that came up when I posted a reel that went viral on Instagram and on Facebook. Some of what happened in the comments surprised me. Thinking back, I probably shouldn't have been surprised, but it spoke to something that has not been my experience, but that I can see now is many people's experience and reality, and I'd like to address it. So here's what happened. I posted a reel that the on-screen hook was, what if downsizing isn't your next chapter? What if it's creating a multi-generational home that fits everyone that you love? And that reel really resonated. As of today, it's got 2,756,865 views, and almost 1.5 million people have seen it. It's also got 58,524 comments, reactions, and shares. I'm not saying that to impress you. It surprised me. Obviously, it struck a chord. But what really surprised me about it, and I'm going to read to you some of the comments that came up on it, was that there was a common theme among not all of the comments by any stretch of the imagination, but enough that it caught my attention. So here are some of the comments that came up. Often the mom becomes exhausted and unwell, trying to keep the peace and keep the home operating. Here's another one. I just don't like how most of the housework lands on one or two. Not fair or right, so it ends up not working because someone will burn out. Here's another one. Expecting mom to take care of everyone or taking advantage of her if she insists on doing so, she will kill herself trying. That one really made me sad. Those went on and on. Those are just a few examples of some of the comments. And so what I realized was that there are many, many women out there who are really feeling overburdened by supporting their families. Now, this is no surprise to anyone. I'm sure women have been feeling overburdened by supporting their families for years and years and years. But what I want to address today is where this comes into play in relationship to multi-generational living and this idea of reinventing ourselves after 50 and rewriting our next chapter. Because I'll be honest, my initial reaction to this was like to respond with a little bit of tough love and say, ladies, we need boundaries, we need agreements, and we need to stick to them. But I sat with this for a week or two, and I really started trying to find within myself the understanding and compassion for what people are really experiencing that are causing them to make these comments. And so not only are there these comments, but a lot of other people are liking and agreeing with these comments. So I can see that it's a really broad theme, that many people have this perception that if you're combining households, bringing perhaps your aging parents and your adult kids and maybe even your grandchildren into your home together or creating a home together, that somehow it's going to fall on one person, one mom, to do the balance of the work. And that's a recipe for burnout and disaster. But why do we feel this way? We've been programmed to feel this way. We've been programmed to believe that our value is dependent upon how we take care of our families. We've been programmed to believe that we have to do it ourselves or it won't be done right. You know, when I started thinking about recording this episode today, I was thinking, why don't I feel this way? Now, of course, I've had moments in my life, in my mothering, in my homemaking, that I have felt like it was all too much. I've been very fortunate to have chosen the right person to marry because we have a very fair balance of contribution in our home with my husband and I. But I also have a great example in my mom, who I'm sure dealt with her own feelings of being overburdened over the years while we were growing up, but who also found her way to make her own guidelines for herself and requirements so that she could manage that better. So I was thinking about that and I was remembering that when I was growing up, we had a cottage and I have this memory of there being like a sign or a cutting board hanging on the wall. And it's saying something like, if you notice the dishes are dirty, then you're the one who's going to wash them. Basically, it said something like, if you point it out, you're going to clean it. I actually texted my mom and my brother this morning and I said, does anyone remember that? Like, am I just dreaming that? And my mom said that she had a vague recollection of it. My brother remembered a cutting board, didn't remember what it said. But it kind of doesn't matter if it existed or not, because the reality is, for me, it did. For me, the memory is, if you wanted to go ahead and point out that something needed to be done, then you were the one who were going to take responsibility for doing it. So I grew up with that mentality, and I think it really shaped what my experience has been as a mom, as a homemaker, as a wife, as a partner in taking care of our home and our family. Now, I'm going to admit something here that my kids will laugh and back me up on. I don't approach motherhood from a perspective of being overburdened. I stopped cooking dinner about 10 years ago. Now, my kids don't really remember all the dinners I cooked when they were very small. I cooked a lot when they were little. But in our house, my husband always had a really long commute. I talked about this when I talked about buying our multi-gen home, that our first 11 years of homeownership, we lived very far away from his work. So he had a very long commute. He would leave the house usually at 6 in the morning, get back after 8 o'clock at night. Our kids were little, and you know, children, you're not waiting till 8 o'clock at night to feed them normally. So we would have dinner without him. We did have family dinner, but it wasn't family dinner in the sense that we were all there for it all the time. Those times were mostly reserved for the weekends for us, because 5 days a week, Rod wasn't home for dinner. So by the time we moved here to our multi-gen home, the kids were like 11 and 12-ish, and my son could already cook. My husband was always a great cook. My daughter was certainly capable of it, although she never really enjoyed it. She does now, though. And I remember one night I made this real effort to make dinner for the two of them. And I made spaghetti carbonara. And they hated it. And we all call that the carbonara night. I looked at them and I said, I'm done. I'm done making dinner. You guys are on your own. And I didn't really mean they were on their own. We always had food, right? Rod would cook on the weekend. He would make a lot of food for the week, and then we would assemble meals as the week went on. But I gave up this idea of, I had to put freshly made brand new dinner on the dinner table every night for people who were perfectly capable of putting a meal together themselves. And I know a lot of moms who are kind of horrified by that idea, but for me, I recognized all the contributions that I was making to my family, and that just didn't need to be one that I placed my value on as a mom. Behind the scenes, I was homeschooling for 10 years, so I spent a lot of time with my kids. It wasn't like that was our only time of day that we could have together. But I think I attribute my ability to manage expectations around contributions to the house primarily to my mom's influence over the years. When we moved into our multi-gen home 10 years ago, my mom, obviously all of us were a lot younger. My mom was continuing a tradition we had since the kids were very small of Wednesdays being Grammy Day. She would take responsibility for the kids on Wednesdays. It was often a day I went to the office. I worked part-time always when my kids were little, often from home, but I always had this one day a week that I could go to my office and my mom would take the kids. In the summer, it was Grammy camp. And she always made dinner for all of us on Wednesdays. So I would come home from work that day and my mom would have made dinner for not just the kids, but for me too, Rod, if he was around, although he wasn't often home on time for that. And over the 10 years of our living together, we've all mostly been on our own for meals. We share meals occasionally, more often probably on the weekend, especially when Rod's cooking something nice. And my mom manages her food, we manage ours, and then sometimes we share. If we're going to explore this idea of multi-generational living, of combining households with multiple generations of adults in the home, then these conversations around division of labor and expectations absolutely need to happen, preferably ahead of time. I also recognize that exploring these conversations are hard for some people. We're going to bump up against cultural expectations, against gender role expectations, against family expectations. So what I wanted to do today was introduce a coaching concept that I hope might be helpful if you're someone who is exploring the idea of multi-generational living, if you're someone who may be struggling with boundaries and agreements. And even if you're not struggling with boundaries and agreements, I think that this very simple concept can be super helpful to set you up for success. And you can use this in any area of your life. We're talking about multi-generational living today, but honestly, it could apply to your work life, to your friendships, to your personal relationships. You can apply this anywhere. And that is this concept of minimum requirements. I'm not sure who invented this term. I remember learning it from Jennifer Loudon, who is a wonderful author. And I remember reading it in one of her books years ago. This idea that we really need to understand our own minimum requirements in any situation. So, for example, with multi-generational living, you will need to think about what are your minimum requirements for everyone's contributions to the household, or for your specific needs in the household. Minimum requirements could be things like putting the dishes in the dishwasher. That might be a minimum requirement for you, that every person old enough and capable enough of it in your household needs to put their dishes in the dishwasher. But maybe other things aren't as important. Maybe your kids making their beds isn't really a minimum requirement. Maybe you can close the door and not look at their bedroom. Or maybe a minimum requirement is that when you arrive home with the groceries, that everyone available in the house who's capable of it comes out to the car and helps carry in the bags and puts away the groceries. It can be really as simple as those things. It could also be that you need a certain amount of quiet time or space in your day and in your house. Maybe you need a room or a corner that is yours, or a time of day that you are undisturbed. We often think of that when we become parents of, how difficult sometimes it is to carve out that 30 minutes or an hour in the morning with your coffee undisturbed, because of course when your children are babies, you don't have a lot of control over when they need you. But as they get older, you can try to teach them how to allow you that time and not interrupt you. But this actually comes up with other adults in the household as well. Maybe it comes up with your mom or your dad. Maybe you need to be really clear that there are certain times that you are going to need time alone. Now, how your space is designed in a multi-generational home can have a great impact on this, of course. We're really lucky in our house. We're on different levels from my mom, and we have really good agreements around private time and private space, and it works really well for us. But I understand that that will not be everyone's situation. That some families have a harder time communicating about that, and also some space situations don't allow for ease of privacy. But I would encourage you to do this exercise of thinking about what are your minimum requirements? What are your minimum requirements for peace of mind? What are your minimum requirements for how your household runs? And when I say minimum, I really do mean minimum. If you have perfectionist tendencies, you need to be honest with yourself about that. We all have our areas that we don't like to compromise in. You'll know yours. But if we can be really honest when we ask ourselves that question, like, what is really the minimum? What is the minimum amount of time I need alone? What is the minimum amount of help around the house that I need? Daily, weekly, monthly. And then the job becomes communicating that to the other people in your life. I know this isn't going to be easy for everyone, but if you do decide to try it, I would love to hear from you. And lastly, for today, I'd really love to encourage us to think about, what does leadership mean in our families and in our lives at this point in our lives? What does leadership look like for you after 50? And how can modeling healthy boundaries be positively impactful for everyone in your family, in your home, and in your life? We're not going to benefit our children, our grandchildren by modeling being a martyr. There's my little bit of tough love, but I do understand why it's hard not to be sometimes. So if you decide to try the minimum requirements exercise, I would really love to hear from you. You can always reach out to me on Instagram. That's where I hang out most often. Or send me an email, Juli, Juli, at juliford.com, Juliford. I'm looking forward to hearing how we can all together craft this next chapter of reinvention after 50. Thanks again for being here. Thanks so much for listening to Home After 50. If this episode resonated, I'd love it if you'd come hang out with me on Instagram. I am at It's Juli Ford, ITSJULIFORD. Just remember, no E on Julie. That's where I share ideas and behind the scenes about multi-generational living, real estate, business, and creating a next chapter that you love. And if you're curious about whether multi-generational living might be right for you, you can grab my free guide. It's in the link right in my Instagram bio. It's a simple way to get started imagining what's next. Because after 50, home isn't just a place, it's who we're becoming. See you next time.